All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome everyone to the Open IT ITAM webinar, Transforming Business Through Software Usage Optimization. My name, of course, is Lynn Weiss, and I'm going to be your host and manage the questions and answers at the end of the session for you, so I will be your moderator. Before we start, of course, remember that all your lines are muted. So if you have any questions as we go through the session, please log them into the questions or the chat window. We will try to get to all the questions either as they come in, if it's timely and needs to be addressed that way, or we'll hit them all at the end. For those questions that we do not get to, we will be sure to have either Linda or someone at OpenIT or ITAM answer them via email afterwards. So everyone, thank you and welcome. Also, there will be a recording of this event, so for ITAM members, they can go to the ITAM site hopefully as early as next week, but we've got the conference coming up, so things may be a little bit delayed, but we hope to get it up next week. And OpenIT has given us a link where they are going to log a PDF downloadable from their site of the slide deck. So we'll put that on the website, and I'm sure they'll reach out to everyone after the webinar as well to let you know where you can download the PDF if you so want to. So to get things moving, I'd like to introduce you to Linda Cole. She is the Director of Sales North America for OpenIT. She's been in the IT industry for over 20 years in a number of capabilities and capacities. Her industry experience includes virtualization, cloud adoption, and managing IT infrastructure. She employs her business management experience from various organizations to advise the clients on how to utilize technology like software metering to solve business problems in a cost-effective way. And in fact, this year she's spoken at the ITAM conference in the spring we had in Henderson, Nevada, and she is also at the Software Asset Management Forum in Manila, Philippines. That's a trip. She will also be speaking for anyone that's coming to the conference the week after next. She's going to be at the ITAM Fall ACE on November 4th at the Kalahari Resort in Sandusky, and she's going to be talking about the benefits of usage metering in cloud solutions. So to get this presentation moving forward, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Linda.
Well, thank you very much, Lynn. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for Transforming Business Through Software Optimization Usage. So today we're going to go over the agenda real quick. We're just going to spend a little bit of time on some industry trends and some economic backdrop that's affecting us in our positions within our companies in the software asset management space, some forces that are driving different changes in our software asset management. We're going to talk about some industries with the biggest impact, but also how that's affecting the other industries and what's going on. We'll spend some time on where that fits into the software asset management lifecycle, and then I'm going to go through some sample reports to just kind of show you and talk through some different scenarios on how usage metering and the usage data can be applicable in each of your organizations. We all come from a very diverse background, but that's fine. We'll talk about what benefits that has, and then we'll wrap up with a short case study, and then we'll go into a Q&A. So let's just jump into it. As we all know, software licensing is getting more and more complicated every month and every year as we go on. The software manufacturers are continuing to change their licensing agreements and the complexity of those license agreements, which I'm sure most of you on the call today are quite well aware of. And so according to an IDC report, 43% of organizations have increased the risk of falling out of compliance because they don't have sufficient process and automation in place. So we'll talk about that throughout the call, that it's not just about a tool. However, we think a tool is pretty important, and we'll talk about all those different things today. But in addition to a tool, it's really critical that we have a process that we can wrap around our software asset or our IT asset management in general. And of course, if you are an ITAM member, you know that this is part of their 4 basic requirements for a software asset management program, the metering component as well as the process. Gartner put out a study that last year worldwide spend on software was $400 billion. That's a huge number. And because the percentage of the software spend on our budgets are going up, we're getting more and more attention on how are we going to look at our software assets and how are we going to, report on them, manage them, etc. Part of that, the interesting statistic here is that between 5 and 6% of that revenue was generated by audits. So 46% of the enterprises in an IDC report had reported that they had been audited at least twice in the last 18 to 24 months. Now typically we think, I'm assuming we have a diverse audience on the call today. We think, oh, audits, they're targeting the Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies, but actually they're dipping down into, smaller, medium-sized organizations. So we're, especially if you look at Microsoft, Adobe, companies like that. So we're not, even if we're in a medium-sized enterprise account, we're not safe, if you will, from an audit perspective. So that's why we kind of bring up some of these statistics. In that same report, 24% of those folks reported paying over $1 million in true-up cost after the audits. 5% reported paying $5 to $10 million, and then 4% reported paying over $10 million in true-up. So a lot of companies have what they call a risk fund that they fund these true-up costs out of. But even if your company budgets for such a thing, an unexpected cost that comes up, clearly none of us want our organizations to have that type of cost going out, an unexpected cost. So how can we use our positions, our total software asset management program, and then more specifically today, usage metering, to help mitigate this so that we can't avoid audits, we can't stop them, but there are things that we can do to help minimize the costs that are involved in that. So if you have not been to an ACE conference, I highly recommend it. There's a lot of breakout sessions that talk about this specifically and how you can posture your company, and of course some of their certifications touch on that as well. Again, a lot of it's not just about a tool, but a tool is the one component, process is the other. So the Forrester said 60% of enterprises who have implemented some usage capabilities around their software asset management have found beneficial. They have found that beneficial. So we're going to talk about, in my opinion, the usage metering is a niche within a niche. So sometimes a lot of, some folks are still managing on a spreadsheet. Some have purchased an asset management tool for hardware and software, but they're in the process of rolling that out. That could take a year or two to get that fully rolled out. One of the benefits of usage metering and usage capabilities is that it's a very short implementation time, and there's actionable data that's literally in 30 days you can have that tool implemented, and there's actionable data that you can do in your organization in the next 30, 60, 90 days. So today, why are we here? Why are we on this call? We're going to talk about a few of the reasons why companies are investing in software asset management and specifically in usage metering. So one is to gain financial control. How do we effectively, plan for our future budgets, avoid unexpected cost? Compliance, again, when we look at audits, how do we ensure that we're fully licensed and compliant at any time? I will mention another thing that when we go through these reports that you'll see, when you go into an audit, the worst, again, this is all discussed at the various different ACE conferences, but the worst position to be in is to not have any data, just to have your purchase. I've purchased X amount of license. When you have this usage data, even if you're out of compliance, it puts you in the driver's seat. So we'll talk about that when we get to some of those examples. attaining better negotiating positions. Again, how do we optimize that? How do we put you in the driver's seat as opposed to the software publishers? Optimizing resources. Again, we don't want to, it might be reduction in cost, it might be cost avoidance. We want to make sure if somebody needs a tool, let's get them that tool, but let's make sure that we're getting our ROI on that tool, that they're actually using it and it's not just sitting there. And then, of course, improve productivity. How can we look at, analyze different skills and work patterns? How can we look at adoption rates, etc.? So we're going to step through these 5 different components today in our talk. I mentioned that we're going to talk about some of the industries with the biggest impact. On the slide, we've got the kind of 6 top industries with the biggest impact. And I'll tell you the reason, they're kind of more mature. I'm going to say they're early adopters of usage metering. And the reason is that, for example, in oil and gas, they have applications that could go up to $150,000 per single user. Same thing in automotive electronic, they might go up to $100,000. Oil and gas would be the number one, in my opinion, and experience. But in these particular industries, here's some examples of some software. You know, these applications range from $40,000 to $150,000. So you can see why they might be early adopters. But I'm here to tell you the good news is that we're starting to see this filter down into, for example, engineering has just kind of come into the market as a strong adopter of usage metering, because again, as those tools get more sophisticated and the cost per user goes up, then people start looking at how do we optimize that. The good news is for every single one of us that's here today, that usage metering can benefit us regardless of what industry we're in. So here's some commonly used applications that almost every organization uses: a Microsoft, an Office, Adobe. Your organization may or may not use a Project or Visio, but I can bet that you're using you know, a Microsoft Office. So even on the commonly used software applications that are rolled out in our organizations, we're going to show through and kind of step through some of the benefits of using a usage metering tool, and what types of things you want to look for in a tool when you go out in the marketplace to evaluate. This is a really high-level example of the life cycle of software asset management. So of course your organization, they'll define requirements, they'll go through an eval period, you know, you'll buy it, it'll get implemented. And then where we fit in is once the tool is operational, how do we optimize that and how do we make sure that we're maintaining? So we do a really good job, most companies, we do a really, really good job on the front end of really vetting that out and making sure we get the right tool, the right feature set, the right type of license agreement, the right headcount. But then what happens after that? How do we manage that? Do we have any visibility of what's going on after that point? So how can we're going to step through some of these. You know, how can we effectively, how can usage metering help us gain financial control when we're trying to look at our organizations and what some of the benefits are? And let me say, I'm going to probably say this many times, the tool has, a usage metering tool has different benefits for different people within your organization. So the benefits to a CFO are different than the benefits to IT, and they're different than if you're the software asset manager. In some organizations, their software asset managers participate in the negotiations and some don't. So whoever's negotiating your agreements versus the departments where these applications are being used. So again, different people in your organization have different uses and benefits. So you want to make sure that you have a tool that's robust enough to not just address one particular need within the organization, but that can address the needs of all the different stakeholders within your organization. So the first example we're going to look at, this is what we call a heat map. And so down this left-hand quarter we have the day of the week, and then across the top we have the hours in the day. So this is just one type of representation of looking at the data, and the data we're looking at is what is the maximum concurrent usage on a particular application for a particular time frame? So this this demo data that we're looking at, we can see that the usage, as we go through, the usage actually starts increasing and maxes out. Because we only have a total available license count of 14 in this example, so it starts to max out. This usage is a company that had an office in the UK as well as the US. So you can see that as the UK is working, and then as the US comes on, that they're starting, because they've got a global license, and again in this particular example, so they start maxing out. So if we were looking at this data set only, we might think that we need to increase our license count. But if we cut the data differently, this is a example of a license efficiency chart. And so it's the same data we're looking at. We had 14 available, 14 in use, but we're actually looking at the duration and time over the actual usage of those licenses. So for example, the 14th license, we can look down here in the details and say, what percentage of the time was that actual license in use, in total hours or in duration? So this report actually does the math for you. So if you wanted a 99 or a 95% confidence rate, you can make some management decisions. So now that we have additional data points, and this is what usage metering is all about, it's about having all the different data so we can cut it and dig into it and look at it from multiple perspectives to make more intelligent business decisions for our companies. So we're all going to have different business cultures and different needs, so our outcomes might be different, but the actual benefits coming from having these type of metrics and this type of data is going to be the same. So we can see, for example, that 14th license was only used 0.5% of the time, the 13th 1%, etc. So if we were just looking at max in use, we could say, hey, we might need to add more licenses. But when we look at this confidence interval, we can say, no, I think we're okay. I mean, you could technically, again, depending upon your individual business cultures, you could potentially even lower your license count. I'm going to show you another example with different numbers. And again, the point I'm trying to make is it doesn't matter if it's 14 license, 140 license, 1,400 license. You know, the actual numbers don't matter. It's the relationship and the data that we're really trying to drill into here. But this is a bigger differential, if you will, in this same chart. Max available is 513 license. Max in use is 434. Again, if we only looked at these two data points, then so we know what we purchased and then we know what we used, we can say, hey, we can look at some potential cost reduction in the delta between these two. However, this one's even more staggering. So if I don't have all the details, but I mean, if we start on the 434th license, I mean, there's 0% of the time it's such low usage. So again, if we go to the confidence intervals that we're looking at, potentially we could drop our license count down from 500 down into the 391. So whether your licenses are, you know, $500 each, $1,000 each, $10,000, $100,000, we can do the math, but I think we can all see the benefit of looking at this. This happens to be an engineering application, so it's much more expensive. So this is significant dollars that are sitting here. This is one of my favorite slides. When I attended the ACE conference in Henderson or Las Vegas back in April, I repeatedly heard from most of the folks there that they struggle with how to get executive buy-in for asset management. You know, so they might have, some of them were lucky enough that that was their full-time job, is their software asset management, but a lot of them, they had that job as well as other jobs, so they wore multiple hats, but they really wanted to get buy-in from all the different areas. So this is just a quick visual that I think kind of tells the story, if you will. So, you know, an example would be if the green line is what was purchased, what your organization's purchased, The blue line is, in this particular example, it's showing if you have a license server. And if you're not familiar with that, there are some applications where instead of having it installed on your desktop, or the license is named user on your desktop, there's actually a license manager that you check the license in and out. So the app's on your desktop, but it actually checks a license in and out. It's transparent to the user, but that's what's happening. And so that's what this blue line represents. And then the red line represents what the actual usage is. So in this example, you know, or scenario that I'm going to set up for you, the users were moving along and they started getting denials, meaning they couldn't work, they couldn't check out the license. So the company purchased more license. So they bump along and boom, the help desk, you know, phone starts ringing again, they purchased more license. Well, had they had, again, they didn't necessarily have any usage data. Had they had this, even if they were just looking at license check-in and check-out, then they would have been able to see that, you know, we would have needed to potentially to purchase this first set of additional license, but we absolutely could have avoided the cost of purchasing the second time. If we drill into that, again, it's all about how much data we can get and how we can cut that data. The red line represents the actual usage. So while they had that application checked out on their desktop, how much were they actually using it? Well, we can see the delta here. That's a significant difference between the two. So instead of having 290 license, they really were only using 140 license. So even again, if we look at just we can put any number on this, but for this one I just used $10,000, not $100,000, but even just at a $10,000 application, that's a $1.5 million differential. So I think you can quickly see the ROI is, you know, on usage metering is typically less than 12 months, and so I think we can see why that is. So there's a couple of things. If you were in this scenario, you have the ability to do a reduction of maintenance and support, and we find that most clients are over licensed if you don't have a good process in place, and you don't have, especially if you don't have a harvesting component within your process. We find that most of our prospects and clients are over licensed, so when they start metering or looking at usage metering, they're able to get some significant cost savings. If we look at, you know, how do we look at compliance and what are we looking at? Again, I mentioned that sometimes it's more important that we have some data to go into those negotiations, because the software publishers will come in and they'll start making all types of assumptions. So in this particular report, obviously we're looking at the standard, the bare minimum kind of standard information. What applications do I have? What versions do I have? What type of licensing agreement do I have? Is it named user? Is it a network license? Is it a global or a WAN license? You know, what are my usage rights in that? Obviously, what's been purchased, and most of us have that data, and this is the piece that's missing. What are we actually using, and where are we off? What does that look like? Another component from a compliancy perspective is license expiration. So you want to make sure that your tool is flexible and robust enough to be able to show you license expiration. This particular example is showing the green are all fine, yellow it's going to expire in 60 days, and red is already expired. But we don't think that's good enough. We think it needs to be a more proactive component. A lot of the usage metering tools in the market are just historical reporting, but you know, we think you need to look for a tool that can actually help you manage proactively and manage by exception. So if you have to go into a tool and look this data up every day or every week, then that's not very efficient on your time. So you would like to look for a tool that can set up alerts. So you can have, you might have this on a dashboard, you might have it set up as alerts, so it's going to email you 60 days out that, hey, I've got something coming up. So again, that'll help you from a compliancy as well as a usage perspective. The other component is again about adding these different data points as we look at the data. So we know what we have, we know what's installed, and we know what's used. So let's, in that example where we were oversubscribed, if you will, where we had not purchased enough license. If you were going into a negotiation, you could look at how long somebody's been in there, and I'm sorry, it's in a different slide, but this particular example is if you have named user agreements named on your software, you want to be able to see, are those users actually using it? So in this example, that we've got some users who they haven't used it recently and they don't have very much usage. So are they no longer with the company? Are they not really utilizing the tool? Do they need to be a named user on your specific licensing agreement, or can we harvest those licenses and use them elsewhere? Here's the date last used that I was referring to a minute ago. So we've got the application installed. We know when it was installed, but I'm oversubscribed. But it would be nice. Imagine the position you'd be in. You'd be in the driver's seat when you're in an audit situation. If you could say, yes, we had more licenses, we had more installations, but I can show you and I can prove to you that we actually were not using them. You're still out of compliance, but it's a completely different dynamic when you're negotiating with the audit team as opposed to, I don't know, I know I have this much installed, or I know I've purchased this many and I have this many employees. That's literally how some of those conversations go. So again, the more data points we get, the better information and the better management decisions that we can make. How can we use usage metering to, better negotiate? We talked about a few of those a minute ago from an audit perspective, but I want to show you some other examples. You want a tool that can simulate different types of agreements. So traditionally, when we would sit down with the software manufacturers and say, okay, we want to look at, we have local, named user versus a LAN versus a WAN. And so they typically, the first thing they say is, okay, what's your usage? And so that's this number here we're looking at. So this report sample is showing you 3 different regions, and the stacked bar represents the total combined, but it's by region. So this is the usage by region, and it goes all the way up to, in this particular case, 15. But what if we were looking, so this is if it was a LAN agreement. What if we wanted to look at a global agreement? Well, again, they would just add this number up and we would do the math and calculate what the advantages were of looking at that. But really, if we look at the true global concurrent usage, this blue line represents the true global concurrent usage. So instead of 15, we only need 11, or it could be instead of 150, right, we need 110. It's not about the individual numbers. It's about the process and the data and how it applies to your particular organization. So I would recommend you look for a tool that's robust that can actually emulate these different types of agreements without you having to do anything. In other words, without you having to make any changes in your infrastructure. This is another example, and we're going to look at this ZMAP where we've looked at the usage as a distinct or named user versus a LAN, how many concurrent LAN users we have, and how many concurrent WAN or global users we have. So you can see there's a huge delta, and on this side we're showing the different percentages. So global or WAN licenses are more expensive than LAN licenses, but if you can't simulate this, if you're just looking at stacked usage, you're not really making the most informed decision on what type of licensing agreement that you want to look at. So this one's so different. You could afford to pay 8 times more for a global concurrent license than you did for an individual named user license. Optimizing our resources. How can we look at that? And we talked about, we don't mind spending money if you need the tool. If our associates need the tool, let's do it. But let's make sure that we're getting a return on that investment. So I put this chargeback up just as an example to remind us. A lot of organizations are not ready for chargeback, but you can actually go through the process and do what we call showback, meaning you go through the same type of process, but you don't actually do a financial chargeback, but you actually are putting numbers to it. Halliburton actually did a couple of presentations in the Spring ACE, and it took them several years to implement this, but they have 100% chargeback for every single asset. And even if somebody leaves a department, if they don't go through the process to turn that equipment back in, harvest a license, etc., they continue to be charged. So it helps drive behavior, culture, and behavior in your organizations. Again, even if you're just doing it from a showback perspective, to make sure that people are actually using what they need. One example, and this is a simple one that probably happens in most of our organizations, is somebody says, I'll give you two. A lot of organizations will go, I need Microsoft Project, I need it, I have to buy it. And so you'll purchase it, and then they might have really only needed it for a specific project that was 30 days, or it could have been 60 or 90 days. It could have even been a year. The point is, after that one use, they were no longer utilizing the software, and if there's no process in place to pull that back, or there's no chargeback, meaning the department heads aren't saying, why am I paying for this when we're not using it, to trigger for you to be able to harvest that. Another example that I think hits all of us is Adobe. So our end users in our organization will say, I have to have Adobe to do my job, or Acrobat. Do I really need that, or can I get away with a reader? And so if by utilizing a usage metering tool, we'll be able to take a look at that. You want to look at a tool that's robust enough. We talked about different people in the company have different value propositions and different benefits from utilizing a usage metering tool. So you want to make sure you have a tool that's very robust and that can easily, you don't want to spend, I know some organizations who they've got folks that spend a week trying to put data together from all different sources to produce some management reports monthly. You want to be able to quickly and more, I would think even better, subscribe to reports so that you can have different, this example is dashboards. It could be dashboards reporting. You want to be able to target those different users and those different stakeholders in your organization. And you want to be able to report it the way they want to see it. So do they want to see it in a chart? Do they want to see it in a pie graph? Do they want to see a histogram, a bar? How can we look at that and something that you can easily customize to each particular person and not have to regenerate, something you can set and subscribe to. And this is just one of an example of a dynamic dashboard. Understanding denials is another component, because there's all different reasons why people get denied a license back when we're looking at that license server count. And so you want to be sure that you've got a tool that's dynamic that can not only report denials, but why? Why am I getting those denials? Did somebody try to log into if you have licensed servers in your organization, you might have seen some of this where they're trying to log into the wrong server. So it's not really about a license count per se. It's other different events that are going on. So you want to make sure you've got a tool that can give you that detailed reporting. Another piece from an optimization perspective is, we call it license hogging, but who's checking out multiple licenses simultaneously? Different organizations have different thresholds. This example is over 2, but it could be 5. That's probably a more common one. But again, there could be a reason, but depending upon the application and the user, that they might be using 2 licenses simultaneous if there's a background job processing, for example. But especially if we're looking at, over 5 licenses, or you'd be surprised when we go into a new prospect, into a pilot perspective, they're like, I have a feeling I know who's kind of abusing the abusing the licensing. Folks come in the morning and they check out a license, or they check out multiple licenses, and they're not necessarily using them. They're hogging them in case they need them. And I thought of a funny analogy. It's kind of like having multiple cars, right, in the parking lot. So, I'm not sure if I'm going to need that car, but I'm going to have it just sitting there in case I need it, or in case something happens to my other one. I just don't want to have to, pick up the phone and call a cab or what have you. So a silly analogy, but we can typically only use 1 license at a time. So it would be great if we had a usage tool that could report on that. And again, back to proactive and managing by exception. We want something that can, show us that data in a dashboard, send alerts to an administrator, send alerts to the end user, or what have you, to help manage that. And lastly, we're going to look at improved productivity, and I'm just going to run through some examples real quickly. Adoption of a new particular software, whether it's Microsoft Office, a new version, or whether you've made a decision to change from one tool to another, meaning that it provides the same functionality but you've gone from one to another. I think it's very expensive to maintain multiple tools, to maintain maintenance and support, so you want to be able to show that yes, the new version is being adopted. If we do need to maintain the old version for some reason, let's reduce the maintenance and support. That's an actionable item. Or is this a training need? There's all types of things that could happen when we look at the different types of information. Actual or active versus inactive use. This is just, again, to show an example that you can measure and meter this across not only licensed servers, but individual, it can be at the browser level. So again, different people use the data differently. In this particular one, OpenWorks, it looks like, that's one of those oil and gas applications, expensive one. It looks like it's idle 50% of the time. So we certainly have the ability to optimize this and improve productivity. So that's, could be some training in terms of what's a best practice for when do you check in a license, what are the reasonable times that you leave it open, etc. Whereas IT might look at this and say, well, Internet Explorer is on our standards list, so that's on our standard desktop image that we push out. But now, wow, people are starting to use Firefox. Do we need to look at our standard, or Chrome or something of that nature? Do we need to look at our standard and maybe modify or update our standard, or do we need to lock down our desktops? So same chart, same graph, different people have different uses for that data. So I'm going to jump into the case study, and just at a high level, our case study is with Murphy Oil, and when they went to the marketplace, these were their goals when they were looking for a tool. Again, we mentioned they're looking for buy-in at the highest level. They were looking for a champion, an executive to support IT in this. They were looking for a single point of contact for managing their software portfolio from an accountability perspective. They wanted to know what they had, so what software do we have across the environment, and this was at a particular region level. So this was not company-wide, it was very small. And they wanted to know who was using it and how they were using it. And of course, at the end of the day, it's all about communication and accountability. They wanted something that was robust enough to produce monthly usage reports, etc. So I'm happy to say, in this particular case, they chose OpenIT. I bring up these specifics just to let you know, again, this is oil and gas, but this was at a region level, a very small region level, and it was oil and gas applications, but this was only 35 users that were affected. So it's not like, oh, they're oil and gas, it was thousands of users. In this particular case study, their investment was $43,000, which may seem little, small to some and may seem large to others, but I'll show you very quickly. Again, it's not about the numbers, it's about the ratio of those numbers and how we can optimize and get savings within your organization. So 35 users, a small investment, a total of $43,000. And what they were able to do is they went and looked at their applications. Again, they identified several applications that were not in use at all. So they kind of thought outside the box and said, well, instead of just reducing the maintenance and support on those particular applications, I'm going to go to the other regions within the company and see if there's any need for that. So from a cost avoidance perspective, they were able to transfer some of those licenses to other regions within the company, so they had a cost avoidance saving, and these are very, very detailed documented cost savings that they were looking at across the board. So they were able to transfer some licenses out, so harvest them and transfer them to another region or another division. They were able to reduce their maintenance and support and a small piece of it. So they went through that, and they have a documented first-year savings of $1.3 million. That's huge. So a $43,000 investment in first year, they have a documented savings of $1.3 million. So we see this type of thing at all of our clients. The ROI depends on where you're at in the license negotiation, for example. This particular case study has kind of two successes. One is this, but the other is the software asset manager who originally did this project was actually recognized and promoted because they, again, thought outside the box and thought company-wide, and they were actually promoted up to cover this same responsibility, only just not for their particular region. They were promoted up. So it's kind of a double success story in that regard. So that's what I have for you today in how we can use usage metering to take your company to a higher level. Again, I want to make sure I reiterate that it's a big elephant, it's one bite at a time, but usage metering is that niche within the niche. So even if you're struggling with trying to get a total asset management package deployed in your organization, usage metering is a very, very quick win, short implementation and a quick win. And again, we just talked about some of these benefits today. Employee productivity, resources, better negotiation, compliance, and gaining control. So that wraps it up. I think, Lynn, we can go to Q&A. I hope that we've shown you in some of the examples. I know we went fast, but it's a lot of data to cover, and there's a lot more. I hope we've shown you some of the benefits and that some of those have resonated with you and your organizations.
Great. Thank you, Linda. Let's see. We've got a couple of questions here. First one, this is a good one. You said it was quick implementation and you can get your return on investment very quickly, but the first question actually is, how long does it typically take to implement a metering solution?
Okay, so I can speak for my tool, if that's okay, Lynn. I would say most, again, when in a usage metering tool, it's a much shorter implementation. Anyone's usage metering tool is a much shorter implementation than a whole IT or software asset management tool. In our particular example, we typically do a pilot, and it's a 30-day pilot before we do a full-blown installation because every organization is different. And what we're looking at and what we want to meter is different. And so we can do a pilot. We can have an install done within 2 weeks. We can meter that for 30 days during an evaluation. If you just wanted to say from scratch, we even skip the pilot. Again, our typical turnaround time is 2 weeks. It takes 3 to 5 man days, if you will, to implement a tool like this, but it's usually spread out over a 2 to 3 week period of time, and that's typically dependent on your organization and what your availability is. But again, you're getting within less than 30 days, let's call it 30 days or less, you are starting to collect data within your organization. And so even with as little as 30 days of data, even from an evaluation period, you have actionable data. I mean, you can make much more informed decisions about your across your organization. Again, different people use the tool differently. So, good question. Very quick implementation.
Okay, great. Kind of a follow-up to that, because you showed a number of reports out there, and how long after that does it take to get that kind of good statistical reporting?
So, another great question. When I'm talking to prospective new clients, their biggest frustration is how cumbersome it is and how time-consuming it is to produce reports. So again, one of the things I talked about is you want a tool that's robust, that's really going to work in your organization. So in our particular tool, we have a lot of canned or template-based reports that come out of the box, so that literally, I mean, within a week, you could look at a week's worth of data. You can be looking at reports. So the administration time on the tool is minimal, and in terms of running reports, you can jump in and run a report in less than 5 minutes. Most of those reports that I showed you, actually all of them that I showed you, are template-based, and you can jump in there and have that data there, ready to go, email, whatever, in less than 5 minutes. So very robust. You can also configure a dashboard. I showed you a couple of examples of dashboards. I mean, again, it's very, very simple. The tool's very dynamic. You can have it in Excel. You can attach it to the database, so you can generate reports in various different ways. It doesn't have to be in our tool. If you're using a business intelligence tool in your organization like a Spotfire or a Tableau, you can generate reports there. So very little administration, and reporting is very dynamic and very simple and quick.
Okay, so I assume a number of those reports were canned reports. How much customization is available? Can the end users customize the reports to some extent?
Absolutely. All the data set that we talked about, that's why we talk about it's about collecting that data and how we cut it and slice it. So that's all stored in a SQL database. So we have the cube that we can do. So customizing a report is very simple, and again, you can do it in our tool, you can do it in Excel, you can do it in any business intelligence tool that connects to a SQL database. So customization is very simple. I know it's not a lot of folks that use SQL, they have to learn crystal reports, and that's cumbersome. The other advantage is once you've defined a particular dashboard or a particular report you want, you can save that. So you just create it once. You don't have to recreate it every month. You can subscribe to reports. You can have a dashboard that goes to a particular again, different dashboards, different people, and they just click on the link to refresh the data. You can send them the reports in an Excel format with slicers if your organization uses slicers in Excel. So it's Office 2010 or higher that has slicer capability, so they can actually change. For example, let's say you send them a year's worth of data. They could change it to a quarter. They could change from looking at this app to another app, so they can actually do that dynamically. So the actual end users themselves end up kind of customizing what they're looking at.
Okay. All right. Great. Another question here is, can the product be run on different servers at the same time, such as some other products, and maintain and a mainframe at the same time in order to get one combined report? Is that possible?
Yes. Yes. Great question. So that's kind of the beauty of one of the benefits of our tool is we give you a global single view. We have a real-time monitor view that actually shows you all of the different license servers throughout your organization. So, and those could be Windows-based, they could be Linux-based. It doesn't matter. We show you a global view of that, and then again, you have filtering so you can cut the data and look at that. So you can look at it by geography, by license server, by feature. There's all different ways that you can do that. But yes, single view for your entire global organization.
Okay, great. I think we've got time for one more question here. One person has asked, how can I use a usage metering solution to negotiate, now this is very specific, pay-per-use contracts? Is that something that's done on a regular basis?
Yes, we actually are partnered with several software publishers where they have standardized on our tool as their tool for pay-per-use agreements. And what I mean by that is if you enter into a pay-per-use agreement with them, they require you to use our tool to actually report on that. But I also have many examples of clients who they're in pay-per-use agreements, and there's a delta because the way we do the usage metering is we're not just looking at a flex log off of a FlexNet server, if we're using the example from the other question. We're not just looking at log files. So our tool is much more complex than that, but a lot of the software publishers are just looking at one data point. Again, it's the same advantage we talked about usage metering. The more data points you have, the better the data. So they're able to sit down with the software publishers and say, here's my actual true usage, and so they can negotiate. Pay-per-use agreements are very different for different manufacturers. So it might be, I have a bundle and I burst over it, or it's just a true usage. But I have many examples, and one just again this week where there was a discrepancy on a paper use that actually was a $100,000 discrepancy, and they were able to use our tool to prove that it was an error on the software publisher side, and that, I mean, just this week, $100,000 delta.
Okay, great.
So thank you. Good question.
Great. I think that's all we have time for at the moment. So I want to thank everyone for participating in today's webinar, especially Linda Cole. Here is her contact information and the Open IT website. If you have any additional questions, please be sure to direct them directly to her, or you can always send them to info@itam and we will pass them along. Remember, hopefully next week this recording will be available on the website, as well as the link to download a copy of the presentation slides, which will link you to OpenIT's website. So everyone, thank you for participating today, and this concludes today's presentation. Bye now.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Lynn. Y'all have a great day.
You too. Bye now.